Welcome back to the Published Pearl. Today we're talking about something that quietly derails more books than almost anything else I see in publishing. And it's not a lack of discipline or talent or even time. It's hiring the right help at the wrong time. Specifically, we're answering this question. What is the difference between a book coach and an editor? And how do you know which one you actually need? If you ever thought, I know I need help, I just don't know who to hire, this episode is for you. And if you've ever hired an editor and then still felt disappointed afterward, I really want you to keep listening. Hi, I'm Dr. Carolyn Warren Wiley, best-selling author and founder of Rose and Pearl Publishing. I help Christian CEOs publish the book that solidifies their message and increases their impact. Most writers don't grow up knowing how books are actually made. We grow up reading finished books, polished books that feel inevitable in our hand. What we don't see is the years of drafting, revising, cutting, reordering, and starting over that come before those pages ever reached us. The mess stays hidden and the results feel seamless. So when someone reaches that moment of thinking, I believe I'm called to write a book, then their instinct is usually very practical and well-intentioned. I need someone to clean this up. That sounds reasonable, logical even. If the product we admire is clean, then surely the solution is to make our work clean as well. The problem is that cleanup assumes the structure already works. It assumes the foundation is solid and the job is just cosmetic. And for most first drafts, especially by first authors, those aren't the issue. We aren't struggling because of bad grammar or clumsy sentences. We're struggling because the architecture hasn't been built yet. You can't polish a structure that hasn't been designed. You can't flow when the rooms aren't connected. What looks like a writing problem is usually a construction problem. Until the book knows what it is and how it's meant to stand, no amount of cleanup will make it feel right. So I want you to think about it this way. Right now, my husband and I really want to renovate our home. I want to paint, I want some updated walls, I want beautiful tile floors. It was built in the 1970s, and there are parts of it that definitely feel that way. All of those things will make our home feel finished and put together. And my husband, of course, who's editing this video, so yes, he's going to get props on this one, keeps reminding me that we can't start there. You see, our house was built on deep, rich soil, and that's a gift in a lot of ways when he's gardening in the summer. But it also means that over the last 50 years, it has settled completely around the corners. Nothing dramatic. I mean, the house isn't falling down around us, but the floors are definitely no longer level. The house actually needs foundational work. And if we ignore that and go straight to cosmetic upgrades, like the fresh paint, the new walls, and the beautiful tile that I want, we'll end up with a house that looks great, but still has the same underlying problem. And worse, when we eventually do the work of fixing the floors, those beautiful tile floors that I want to put in will crack and break as the structure is leveled. So what will feel like progress now will turn into unnecessary expense and disappointment later. That's exactly what happens when writers jump straight to editing. The book isn't collapsing. It's not a disaster, but the structure hasn't been leveled yet. Adding polish on top of an unaddressed foundation problem doesn't fix it. It just makes the fix more costly later. Foundational work can feel slower. It's certainly less exciting. It's harder to explain, but it's the difference between building something that lasts and paying twice for the same mistake. And once the structure is right, that beautiful finishing work finally has something solid to rest on. And I'll get my tile floors. Now, I want to be very clear. Editors are essential. Again, they're the tile floors in this scenario, right? They're gorgeous. They're wonderful. You need them. But I'm not suggesting you replace your editor with a book coach. A good editor is worth their weight in gold. An editor works on a manuscript, though, that already exists. Their job is to refine, clarify, strengthen, and polish what's already on the page. Yes, that includes grammar and spelling, but actually, that's one of the smallest slices of the pie that they do. At the developmental level, an editor steps back from the sentence-by-sentence details and looks at the book as a living, breathing whole. The first question is always clarity. Is the reader oriented, or are they quietly confused without realizing why? This includes whether the main idea of each chapter is clear, whether transitions make sense, and whether the reader already knows where they are and why it matters. From there, logic comes into play. The editor examines how ideas build on one another, whether arguments progress in a coherent order, and whether conclusions are actually supported by what came before. This isn't about being academic or rigid. It's about making sure the reader hasn't asked to leap across gaps the writer never bridged. Pacing is another major focus. Sometimes sections might linger too long, exhausting the reader, while others rush past moments that deserve more weight. A developmental editor looks at the rhythm of the book. Where does it need to breathe? Where does it need to move faster? Where would a pause deepen the impact? Repetition is evaluated with care. Sometimes repetition is intentional and powerful. Other times it's a sign the writer's circling an idea instead of advancing it. The goal isn't to strip your voice or emphasis, but to ensure each return to an idea adds something new rather than saying the same thing again. Consistency matters too. Consistency of tone, point of view, structure, and even underlying theology or messaging. A developmental editor watches for places where the book subtly contradicts itself or shifts its rules without explanation. These can quietly erode the reader trust, which makes the final product less impactful. Finally, there's the flow of the whole book. This is the felt experience of reading it. Do the chapters naturally connect? Do paragraphs move smoothly from one thought to the next? Does the reader feel guided rather than disjointed? The reader doesn't notice it at all, but they just turn pages thinking, is this what was intended? They're asking, does this make sense to a reader who doesn't already know the author? Editors make the book better. A developmental editor will begin their work with the critical assumption that the book itself is already fundamentally sound. The core idea is clear. The purpose exists. The writer has already made the big decisions about who the ideal reader is. What is the theme? That means the editor is not co-creating the concept. They are not there to help you discover what the book is really about, or to untangle a message that hasn't really yet taken shape. They aren't determining who the book is for, defining the audience, clarifying why the book exists in the first place. Those questions belong upstream, before the manuscript ever reaches an editor's desk. Likewise, a developmental editor is not deciding what should or should not exist at a foundational level. They aren't building the table of contents from scratch, cutting entire sections because the book lacks direction, or adding missing pillars that were never fully formed. The work exists already on the page, and they assume that it's there, belongs there, that their task is refinement, not reinvention. In other words, developmental editing is about strengthening something that already stands, not constructing the framework from the ground up. When a manuscript reaches this stage, it should already know who it is. The editor's role is to help it become its clearest, strongest, most coherent version, not figure out its identity. And this is where so many writers get burned, not because they lack talent or depth, but because they bring the right heart to the wrong stage of the process. They hand an editor a manuscript that's emotionally meaningful, full of important stories or insights, deeply personable, deeply knowledgeable, and the material matters. The writer cares. There's substance on the page. But underneath all of that richness, something essential is still missing. The book doesn't yet have a clear through line that carries the reader from beginning to end. The readers themselves haven't been clearly defined. The voice, the examples, the emphasis, the shift without a stable anchor, this structure hasn't fully settled. And it means the ideas exist, but not yet in a shape that can hold them. So the editor does exactly what they're trained to do. They make the manuscript cleaner. They sharpen sentences, they reduce repetition, they smooth transitions. And on paper, the manuscript becomes objectively better. And yet the writer reads it and thinks, why does it still feel off? Like the discomfort is real and confusing, and especially after investing that much time and money and emotional energy into the process. That unease isn't failure, though. It's a mismatch of timing. The manuscript wasn't yet ready for that level of refinement because it was still asking foundational questions that no amount of polishing could resolve. Editing can clarify a message, but it can't create one that hasn't been named. This is where a book coach comes in. We work before and during the actual writing process, not after the fact. Our role exists upstream of editing, at the point where the book is still being formed rather than polished. This is not someone you hire to fix sentences or clean up prose. A book coach doesn't arrive with a red pen, or pink in my case. They arrive with questions, frameworks, and a deep understanding of how books are actually built. The real work of a book coach is helping you construct the book itself. It begins with clarity, getting precise about what this book is meant to say, not in a vague, sentimental way, but in a way that can actually sustain a full manuscript. One of the first questions I ask every client on our calls is, what is this book meant to do? It helps you choose the right idea to anchor the book, not simply the one that feels the most emotionally charged in the moment. I mean, emotions matter, but without discernment, it can really pull a book off course. From there, a book coach helps design a structure that can carry meaning, not just information. This is the difference between a collection of thoughts and a book that leads the reader somewhere on purpose. Along the way, a coach will teach you how writing actually works, how drafts are supposed to be messy, not clean and beautiful, how clarity emerges through the process, and how learning the craft of writing is different from judging yourself for not already having mastered it. I'm learning how to do watercolor, and it amazes me how many people I see currently in this same stage with me. We've done, 5 paintings, and we're practicing. And does our art look like the teacher's? No, not at all. And sometimes you might even be able to tell it's the same painting, but not always. But do I feel bad about what I'm producing? No, I'm having a blast. I'm learning, and I'm learning to let go of control, which is one of the things that watercolor teaches you. So why do we not apply the same thing to writing? That as we write, it's gonna be messy to begin with. That should just be part of our expectation. Most people who come to a book coach are convinced they need that cleanup help, that grammar help, because we've never learned the fundamentals of how to structure and write. Just like I feel like I should be able to just put paint on the page. I don't realize that I had to put water down first. Who'd have thought? Almost none of the people that I work with realize that what they need is actually a book coach instead of an editor. They don't understand that writing isn't just a technical skill. It's an art. It's about clarity and structure and beauty. And once those are in place, the writing has something solid to land on, and everything else becomes far easier to refine. I once had a client come to me with a memoir draft she was certain was ready for editing. She had worked really hard and done some real work. She'd written a lot. The stories were meaningful, honest, worth telling. The work mattered. But what she had on the page wasn't a memoir yet. It was at most a collection of short stories, powerful moments placed side by side, but not bound together by a single narrative thread. There was no through line carrying the reader from one experience to the next. No shaping question or arc that transformed those memories into a cohesive whole. When I named that, she initially felt overwhelmed. She believed she was past that foundational stage and that the hard conceptual work was behind her. I mean, imagine me hiring an interior decorator and then coming in and looking at the floor to help me pick out tile. And instead of us choosing tile, I'm told, well, you're going to first have to hire a structural engineer to make sure the floor is level. That's going to be a blow. However, once she realized that this wasn't a step backwards, it was actually an invitation to make her book so much better. She leaned into the coaching and began rebuilding the book from the beginning, on purpose, with intention, and everything shifted. Her voice changed. Her confidence changed. The writing itself deepened and sharpened. It finally had something solid to grow from. At one point, she looked up and she was like, I didn't know I could even write like this. She could. She always could. She just needed help learning how to shape what she already had. That kind of transformation doesn't come from line edits or grammatical cleanup, which she will still need. It comes from the initial coaching, from doing that foundational work that turns meaningful words into an actual book. So many authors jump straight into editing because it feels efficient, looks like progress. It sounds like the reasonable next step. In reality, it's a shortcut straight back to frustration. When a book hasn't been properly shaped, polished, editing can't fix the real problem. It can only make the surface look smoother. The result is usually a book that looks professional and sounds fine on a technical level, but quietly fails to do what it was meant to do. It doesn't engage the readers, doesn't get talked about or recommended, and it rarely sells beyond a small circle of friends and family who already care about the author. That outcome isn't a failure of self-publishing itself. It's a failure of process. Strategy and craft were skipped, so the book never had a chance to become what it could have been. Self-publishing then gets a bad reputation because amateur work is released every day without development, without direction, without discernment. But the opposite is also true. Independently published books can be just as strong, just as meaningful, and lasting as traditionally published ones when they're developed and crafted with care. A book coach exists to make sure the book is actually worth editing before you invest in polishing it. Editing then refines what's already working. Coaching helps ensure there's something solid there to refine in the first place. So this isn't an either-or conversation or a book coach versus editor. No. This is sequencing. The question isn't whether coaching or editing matters. It's that they both are super important, but they belong in the right stage of the process. So for most nonfiction authors, the healthiest plan is straightforward. Coaching first, then editing, then polishing. than publishing. Coaching establishes the structure and helps you write with intention. Editing comes next, once the book knows what it is and where it's going, and it refines, sharpens, and prepares for publication. I've worked with clients who've absolutely had the raw writing skills to push forward without an initial coach. The grammar wasn't the issue. Craft wasn't the issue. But what was the issue was book positioning, those strategic decisions that are made in the foundational stages about what the book was called to do. So even for those of you who are thinking, well, I don't really need a book coach because I know the fundamentals of writing, might still need to consider whether you know the fundamentals of positioning your book to do its job. The real question isn't which is better, coaching or editing. You should understand by now that you really need both. If you have a clear manuscript, a defined reader, and the book is already clear on what it's supposed to do and how to do it, an editor might be the stage that you're at. At that point, the work is only about refinement, sharpening language, preparing it for publication. But if you're stuck, if you feel caught in that washing machine circling the same material, overwhelmed and quietly wondering why this feels harder than it should, editing is not the best next step. You won't be able to polish away that confusion. It won't resolve the underlying issue. What you're missing in that moment isn't technical skill, it's clarity. And clarity is the work of a book coach. For those of you writing from faith, this matters enough to say it plainly. If God has called you to write, He's also equipped you to write. But that doesn't mean that the skill arrives fully formed on day one, or that the process will feel effortless. It means that the resources already exist, waiting to be developed. Wisdom grows, skill grows, clarity grows. All of it unfolds through obedience, practice, and the willingness to be taught. Writing is no different. Calling and craft are not in competition with each other. They mature together. A well-coached book doesn't just get finished, it gets used. It finds its reader. It carries what it was meant to carry. And in the end, that's the difference that really matters. So if you're unsure about what kind of support your book actually needs right now, you don't have to guess your way forward. You can book a strategy session with me, and together we can discern the next right step before you spend money fixing the wrong problem. The link is in the show notes. And if today's conversation was helpful, make sure you're following the podcast so you won't miss any future episodes. And if you know another writer who's stuck in the same place, this might be one worth sharing. Thanks for spending this time with me. And until next time, write it anyway.